As Professor Lee just introduced, today my talk will be on phonetic approaches to examining speech perception and production in adverse conditions. Well, the ability to communicate effectively through speech is very important in our lives, from socialization to professional communication. However, speech communication does not always happen in a quiet environment. In everyday life, we're surrounded by all kinds of noises. For example, those babble noise, people talk and chat in restaurants, and also there are traffic noises on the road. So, and then even there are cases when speech communication can be extremely challenging. For example, when we wear masks, when we speak through facial masks, this is something that we all have been experiencing in the past several years and during this current also pandemic situation. So when this happens, and there are changes, interferences to our to the voices, to the way we speak, to the way we articulate. And so will be those speech signals in the voice messages that we convey. In addition to these external variables, there are also linguistic variables that may affect the way we speak. For example, we may all speak in a second or foreign language, or we may need to talk with people or with thick accents. So all these are what we consider here as adverse conditions. And so, well, in today's webinar, I have selected 3 studies we had in the past on speaking under noise, and also speaking through facial coverings to talk about how these external and linguistic variables may influence the way we speak and influence the way we understand speech sounds. Wow. Speech communication is a complex process that involves multiple stages, from the choice of sounds and the formation of words in the speaker's mind, to the transmission of sound in airwaves, until these signals arrive at the listeners, pick up by the listener's ears, and be interpreted eventually in the listener's mind. And in this speech chain shown here, if there's any interference occurs at any stage, or if there's any modification occurs at any step, then the way we speak will be the way we speak will be changed, and there will also be, consequently, there will be changes in the speech signals that we convey. So all these, that's why we wanted to see when things happens, what would happen when things happens in the speech chain, what would happen in the speech signals, in speech production and perception. Right, so the first example or study, the first 2 studies that I select to share with you are on the effect of Lombard speech, or Lombard effect on speech production. Well, Lombard speech was discovered by Lombard almost a century ago, and which is also why it's named after this scientist. Well, Lombard speech refers to the phenomenon that when we speak under noise, or when we feel the interference of surrounding noises, we tend to voluntarily or involuntarily increase the vocal efforts so that we can compensate the speech signal, the degradation in the speech signal, or for the benefit of auditory feedback. The eventual purpose is to enhance the speech intelligibility, in clarity and speech intelligibility for the listeners. While the Lombard speech has been studied for like almost 100 years in various and confirmed in various languages, and in first language, in native speech communication. When people speak under noise, it's confirmed that the speech signal would be louder, have a higher vocal amplitude, and the vowels in their speech may be lengthened, and also people's their pitch will be raised. So all these studies, and in particularly at segmental and super-segmental levels, phonetic modification have been reported in literature in Lombard speech. Is that consonants tend to be slightly shortened, slightly compared with how vowels will be lengthened. Well, in lexical stresses, the contrast between strong and weak syllables, also the degree of contrast between the weak and strong syllables can also be changed under noise when compared to speaking quiet. Well, over the past centuries, the study on Lombard speech in L1s are abundant. We have found research in English, French, Spanish, and Japanese, various languages, all have confirmed on this effect phenomenon of Lombard. However, the same phenomenon, Lombard effect, has not. There's a lack of research on the Lombard speech in non-native settings. How second and foreign language speakers would be affected when they are speaking under noise. So that's what we wanted to fill in the literature on speaking under adverse conditions. So the first study that I would like to share with you actually has been also reported in a conference in 2021, Speech Production in Noise by Chinese Learners of English. In this study, we wanted to investigate the effect of noise on L2 speech production. In particularly, we wanted to examine the phonetic modification, if there is, on consonants, vowels, as well as lexical stresses in the English speech produced by Chinese speakers in both quiet and noisy condition. This initial study was guided by two research questions. First one is, well, are there and will there be phonetic patterns or modifications in this second language speech? I mean, if Lombard effect is present in English as a second language speech. And also the second question is, what would happen if Chinese speakers would show similar Lombard effect in their production of their L1s and also in their L2. And to answer these questions, we recruited, it's a very small scaled study. We recruited 3 Chinese speakers, including 2 Mandarin speakers and 1 Cantonese speaker. They all were very fluent users of English as a second language. And they were instructed to produce 2 word lists actually. And these words from Mandarin, from Cantonese and English were embedded in carrier sentences as shown on the screen. And then we also played background noise while these speakers produce these words. While these noise were babble noise, people's chatting and talking, but not intelligible. Okay? We recorded them in cafeterias and in our canteens and mix it together to use it as background noise. And then we played this noise out through loudspeakers at 76 decibel when the speakers read this word list out. So they hear the voices, they hear the noises, and we actually recorded not only their speech production, but also the background noise. Together, our talkers produced 300 trials, 300 words that we could use for acoustic analysis. And when we in our recording after transcription and segmentation, we conducted a series of acoustic measurements, including those parameters we measured included duration of consonant, and also duration of the vowel, and also the fundamental frequency, the peak fundamental frequency of vowels. All these was done using Pratt. And after we got extracted these values, we also performed some calculation to understand better how lexical stresses, I mean the patterns between strong and weak words are maintained or not. And so we calculated the PVI, so-called PVI, which is a commonly used index to examine, in the past, to examine how the production of stresses. This is called pairwise variability index. Basically, it is a ratio of phonetic correlates between strong and stressed and unstressed syllables. It has been widely used in phonetic studies to examine, for example, the isochrony. But in here, we use this as an important cue to the degree of contrast between a stressed and an unstressed syllable in a bisyllabic word used in this study. So the PVI we used is this here below is the formula we used to calculate this ratio. And the PVI also actually provide this kind of normalized values, so for us to understand, to compare across speakers and across words, across phonetic context. So greater PVIs means there is greater contrastivity between strong and weak syllable. Here's the results from our three talkers. So the first here is a table of duration of the consonants. You can see here we compared the production between L1 and L2, L1 being either Mandarin or Cantonese, L2 being English for all talkers, all three talkers. And you see that in their L1s, the consonants are much longer when they talk in a quiet situation, but in noisy condition, their consonants are much shorter. But such kind of difference in duration is not found in there too, when they spoke in English. So that means for Cantonese and Mandarin speakers, when they speak their own language, speaking in their native language, the consonants, I mean, durational wise, is not affected by the noise, is affected by the noise, background noise, the babbles. But when they speak in English, on average, the consonants in English are much longer, okay? And this durational lengthening of consonants probably was not found in a noisy condition. And we also measured the fundamental frequency of their vowels and also the peak values of this fundamental frequency. Here are the results from the vowels. Again, we compared them between across language background, across language, and across the speaking conditions. In general, the vowels, both in L1 and L2, we found that the vowels are much longer when speakers were talking under noise. But the fundamental frequency, though, we did not find significant differences. Both in quiet and in noise conditions, their vowels, the pitch, if you want to say, the pitch of their vowels are comparable with each other. So consonants are more affected, and the vowels, on the other hand, were also, but the temporal features of consonants and vowels are both affected by noises, but not the spectral feature, like fundamental frequency of vowels. And because we also ask our learners to produce bisyllabic words, so that means there will be trochaic and iambic words they produce, so that we can examine how they can maintain, or whether and how they will maintain a contrast between a strong and a weak syllable in quiet and in noise. So we compared, we actually calculated the ratio between duration and intensity and also fundamental frequencies of all these syllables, from all these syllables, and here's the results. So the SW stands for the strong, weak words, while WS stands for weak and strong words. So that's the stress patterns we examined. In general, both in both quiet and noisy conditions, the stress, the PVIs, or the ratios, all seems to favor the syllable that's stressed, the second syllable that's stressed, or the and the how do we say, these iambic syllables. Well, and then if you compare these stress patterns across speaking conditions, we found that in general they are relatively there's no non-significant changes in terms of the PVIs or in terms of the degree of contrast. It seems that these speakers seem to maintain their the contrast between strong and weak syllables. And here's the PVI regarding the peak value of fundamental frequency. Again, we did not find significant differences between quiet and noisy conditions or across these stress patterns. So in general, we say that with this very small set of data, we only recorded 3 speakers. Of this small set of data, we confirm that it is true that when Mandarin or Cantonese speakers were talking under noisy condition with the background noise of babble noise, their speech showed this Lombard effect. Remember, both vowels and consonants were lengthened significantly when they talk under noise. So it's true that there is a Lombard speech in their L1s, and as well as in their second language, in the second language. But however, the changes, modifications to these phonetic cues in their L1 and L2 are not exactly the same. So because due to this small set of data, we couldn't conclude whether it's because we did not record enough speech or did not have enough diversification in the speech, in the phonetic context. But we can, at least in the initial stage, we did find some numerical differences between L1 production and L2 production, or in a sense that how the speakers may adapt to noisy speaking condition when they speak in their L1s or when they're speaking L2s. So we wanted to, like we said, we confirmed on the effect of noise, okay? Particularly on the temporal features, the segmental features, consonants and vowel durations were both lengthened. Okay? While the vowels, on the other hand, seem to have show a greater Lombard effect than consonants, which actually echoes those previous findings on English. Okay? So in both Chinese and English, Mandarin and Cantonese, we confirmed this Lombard effect and also confirmed the effect, the degree of such kind of influence on different types of segments. And while on the other hand, when our Chinese speakers try to produce English words and try to, with their production of stresses, whether they can still maintain this kind of strong versus weak differences, we found there is a slight, very minor, because mild weakening of such kind of contrastivity. And in terms of the vowel duration, and even though the vowels are lengthened in noisy condition, it seems that the lengthening is not in proportion to its original contrast in a quiet situation. So we hypothesized at the time that noise may have, because these are not native speakers of English, and when these second language learners speak under noise, their attention to phonetic details may be distracted by the fact that they have to deal with this adverse variable external interference from the babble noise. Well, it can be another explanation due to our study design. We played this noise through loudspeakers and also recorded this noise actually in our recording. It could be that this signal degradation have also affected the acoustic realization, phonetic realization, and override some of the phonetic cues. So that's why we actually also then continued to conduct study on the same topic, but which we're getting into very soon. And not only effect of noise, but we also found effect of language on how the phonetic modifications to speak under noise by our Chinese speakers. In our current study, we compared Chinese and English, okay? And we found that in both language production, the fundamental frequencies were relatively maintained in quiet and in noise, which differed from the findings from previous studies on English as a first language. They reported that English speakers tend to lift their fundamental frequencies under noise. And then we hypothesized, because in Chinese we use pitch variation, the pitch variation to contrast lexical meaning. So that kind of phonemic status may play an important role in preventing the Chinese speakers from making any modification to this important phonetic cue. Okay? So, or there can also be an alternative explanation to this lack of change in fundamental frequency. That is that Chinese speakers may have adopted some specific phonetic strategies to guide them to make modifications to these phonetic cues. Well, but anyways, like I mentioned, this first one is a very small scale study with only 3 speakers. So these are we don't want to jump into premature conclusion based on the findings, but that we want to say that we could probably enlarge, increase the speaker pool or the phonetic context to further test the hypothesis we get from the first study. That's why we continued with we continue with a more focused study on the production of lexical stresses by Cantonese speakers, are still under noisy condition. And this was also study was presented in a conference in last year. Well, so we have established in our previous study that Lombard speech is present in both native and non-native situation. Well, the studies we have examined and retrieved from literature also confirmed that how Cantonese speakers may have it may raise the fundamental frequency in noise than native speakers of English would, while Mandarin speakers may tend to use a different phonetic strategy in quiet noise. Well, so we found these all confirm that L1 may play not only those external variable, but also L1's linguistic variable may play an important role in determining what and whether and what kind of phonetic cues may be modified when speaking under noise. And while this follow-up study was guided by 3 research questions, we wanted to figure out, well, with a more focused approach, we want to see how Cantonese English as a second language speakers would produce lexical stresses in English. What kind of modification, phonetic modifications will there be? What kind of strategies they may adopt to maintain, if there is, maintain the contrast between weak and strong syllable or stressed versus unstressed syllables, and what would happen to the vowels in these syllables. Okay. And for this follow-up study, we recruited a little bit larger pool of participants, including 13 native speakers of Hong Kong Cantonese. There are 6 male and 6 female speakers. And in addition to that, we also recruited native speakers of English who all produced a short list of trisyllabic words in English. These are listed here. These words were either have their first syllable stressed or have their second syllable stressed, so that we would focus on the first and the second syllable in our phonetic analysis that followed. Well, the similar procedure was adopted in recording, that we put these English words in a carrier sentence. But this time, we did not play the babble noise through loudspeakers, but rather through the headphone, but instead of play them through headphones that to the talkers. So our talkers would wear a headphone while they produce these trials. Okay. And for these phonetic analysis, we added a few more elements, a few more correlates to examine. Well, the first one is we included the long-term average spectrum, which provides us a general understanding of the power spectrum of frequencies that comprise a speech sample. We also calculated the speaking rate, which refers to actually the number of syllables per minute, per second, sorry. And then we converted these values again to calculate the PVI, the pairwise variability index, so that we can see how these stressed and unstressed syllables are produced, or this contrastivity is maintained across these syllables. Here's our results. The first one is on the average spectrum. On the left is the section from a male speaker, a native speaker of English, while on the left is a male speaker, entities ESL male speaker. So on average, the dotted line, the dashed lines are those the power spectrum, the distribution in noise condition, while the solid line below is from the quiet environment. In general, not only in English, but also in Cantonese, we see that the speaking under noise seem to involve a greater higher energy level than in speaking in quiet, which is suitable. And then if you look at through the frequency range, we can see that if you look at the right panel, the energy level was relatively maintained in this lower frequency range, and then dropped abruptly to when we get to the much higher frequency range. Well, on the left side, we see some fluctuation in the lower frequency range, and also a less sharp and not that sharp tilt in the energy distribution. Well, this is just an initial visual inspection of this power spectrum. We are yet to figure out a more quantitative way to compare this power distribution between noise and quiet condition and also across language. Then we also calculated the speaking rate of our speakers, and we found that the Cantonese speakers, when they talk English, speak in English, they speak much faster in quiet than when they are under noise. While the native speaker, on the other hand, seem to maintain their speaking rate under noise. Well, I deleted some details and just jump into just arrive at the conclusion part. Just want to say that these follow-up study on a much focused group of Cantonese speakers who use English as a second language seem to show us that just as confirmed from our previous study, the Lombard effect is confirmed in their English speech under noise. But when they speak English, when they speak a second language, if you compare these findings from a previous study, we found that their modification strategies may slightly differ when they speak English. We found higher vocal amplitude. We see the higher energy level, and they also speak much slowly when there is noise. Not only this, but that they have the increased fundamental frequency and intensity. In this time, we get to record their voices without the noise in the background, having their intensity and the both spectral and temporal features in their voices. Our Cantonese speakers may, however, show different compensating strategies from the native speaker. For our native speakers, they seem to strengthen, when they speak, they seem to strengthen both stressed and unstressed syllables, make it longer or make it stronger and louder at the same time. As our Cantonese speakers seem to apply these kind of compensating strategy across board on both stressed and unstressed syllables. But our native speakers, on the other hand, they seem to maintain the degree of contrastivity across stressed and unstressed syllables with a slight enhancement on the stressed syllables. So that means when they feel there is noise, they try to enhance that unstressed syllable, the weak syllable, so that to increase the intelligibility. But our second language speakers, our Cantonese speakers, when they speak English under noise, it seems that because of the non-native setting, they tend to enhance everything, and not only the unstressed, but also the stress syllables, so that they can still maintain the speech clarity and intelligibility. So this is very quickly to show you how we have been trying to understand the Lombard effect, or how noise may affect the way we speak, articulate. But the studies here I share with you were mainly on the acoustic values, acoustic cues. We actually drew some hypotheses based, or we see speculations, if you want to say, based on the acoustic cues, that what may have happened to the articulatory process when we try to adapt to some interfering variables or to this noisy condition. Right, so this is the first part that I want to share with you regarding the Lombard effect, the first type of adverse condition that we have studied. And then the second type of adverse condition that I want to discuss is the speaking through facial coverings in Cantonese. But if you can recall what we have just mentioned, this speech process or the speech chain, any interference that occurs at any stage of the speech chain may affect the way we talk, understand sounds. While the facial coverings, like this picture shown us here, including masks, facial masks that we are so used to during the pandemic situation, but there are also other kinds of facial coverings that may cover half part or even half of the face, preventing people from seeing the our mouth or the lip movement. So these both audio and visual cues of speaking are obscured in this kind of condition, which will severely affect the way we produce and the way we speak. And then our study, our initial attempts on the speaking, what happens to speaking under facial coverings were also published in last year in Journal of Voice. And so the following are from this published research we had. Not only during the pandemic, we see that people use facial coverings to protect ourselves, but also actually such kind of condition phenomenon was also found in the criminal cases where those criminals may use masks to cover their faces while they doing the bad thing. Here I'm just citing from two news reporting, and I'll try to show this figure from 2020, and of course overlap with this pandemic situation. There's a hike in the number of covered or masked crimes. So actually talking through facial coverings or talking through masks have been a very important topic under the criminal or forensic voice analysis. So to study speaking under adverse condition like through facial coverings also carry very important applied benefits or significance, not just to phonetics, but also to forensic or to the combat with the crimes. Well, these studies, because actually the studies on the impact of facial coverings on our voices on speaking is not something that's recently been due to the pandemic. It was actually several decades ago. People have already started to investigate the influence of like cloth or materials on audio signals. And it was found like in the 1970s that the textile materials like cloths can cause transmission loss to audio data. Okay? And for people who worked on loudspeakers, they have already studied, and also textile sciences, they have already noted the important negative influence of coverings on the signals, on speech signals, especially at higher frequency range. Well, in more recent study, especially in the past several years, just 2 or 3 years, more research, there's also a big increase on such kind of studies, on such kind of topics, all confirming that wearing facial coverings would affect, again, and facial coverings are like these low pass filters that would attenuate or negatively affect the transmission of speech signals. And what you see here on the right are a figure demonstration of various facial masks that phoneticians have tried to examine. So in these studies, they found that facial masks, facial coverings or masks can attenuate speech signals, and especially for the signals at the mid to high range, frequency range. And also they found notice that in English, when people speak through facial masks, their vowel spaces are enlarged, okay? Are bigger, and they have a larger vowel space, and in terms of the first and second form and frequency. Well, the wearing facial masks affect speech production, affect articulation, because we have to press the facial masks on over to cover our nose and mouth, which provides a limited space for the lip movement, and for the mouth, the jaws, for the lips to move around during articulation. And not only in speech production, but also in speech perception, people have identified the effect of coverings, various coverings. What you see here are some findings from two studies in 2020 and 2021. On the right side here are the rate of speech, an average rating of speech intelligibility in I think it's English. Okay? That when people hear a speech, how well they can recognize the words in it, and also
5 minutes left for the presentation session.
Oh, thank you for reminding. Oh, I'll just move on quickly. Spare you with these details. Just in speech perception, researchers have also found the significant influence on how people can recognize and recall words and sentences in English and in German. Well, we found that in literature, much have been done on languages like English and German. However, there's very scarce literature focused on Cantonese or on tonal languages. So that's why we motivated us to study how sounds would be, how voices would be like, or how we may change our voices when we are covered under the facial coverings. So again, we tried a very preliminary attempt on these and recruited 3 female volunteers who speak Hong Kong Cantonese, and they produced these 30 trials, 30 words for us to conduct phonetic analysis. In general, here's a demonstration of how many different masks they were wearing. Oh, this is actually my PhD student, Janti. And while after recording, we again extracted phonetic details and converted them to normalized to compare across speakers, across phonetic context. In general, we found that people speak much slowly under different masks, and their energy levels changed differently and showed in different patterns behind masks, behind facial shield, and their vowel spaces, of course, as echoing the English discoveries from English, and also shrank or somehow changed and shifted under different masks. And because we are interested in tones, we're also examining how Cantonese tones are alike when people are speaking under different masks. And you can see here, the tones are all elevated to a much higher frequency range. And so we found, we compared our findings with those from English and German, and noticed that our findings were differ from the previous ones, because our Cantonese speakers speak much slowly than reported in English speakers who seems to speak faster. And also the vowel space is also changed to a different pattern. So all these findings prompted us to raise some speculations over why our Cantonese speakers may adopt different strategies from English speakers would do. But all these speculations would require further empirical studies to confirm. Okay? So speaking in different, to conclude, to sum up my discussion and sharing. So there are various interfering variables out there that would affect the way we speak and would affect the way we perceive speech sounds. But human vocal system is very dynamic, adaptable. We voluntarily or involuntarily may take different measures to compensate the loss of speech signals or the interference of from external environment, so that we can maintain clear speech and maintain the clear perception by the listeners. So this study was supported by 2 findings, and we also would like to say thanks to all those who have lent their voices and be very patient through all these recordings, especially for those who wear the different masks in different trials for so many times. Here again are the 3 studies that I mentioned I used in this web talk here. And thank you very much.